Okay, hold on. Before you take one more bite of pizza, I need to tell you something. And I'm warning you, this is going to mess with your head a little bit. But trust me, you'll like where it lands. Pizza is not Italian. Now, okay, I know what you're thinking. Dude, are you serious right now? And look, I'm not saying Italy doesn't deserve massive credit. It does. But here's the actual truth. The tomato, the single most defining ingredient in the pizza you know and love, is a South American fruit that Europeans were so terrified of they refused to eat it for nearly 200 years. They grew it as a houseplant, a decoration. They thought it was going to kill them. And that famous story about Queen Margherita of Italy, the one printed on menus in thousands of pizzerias around the world, the beautiful founding myth of modern pizza, a food historian who spent years studying the original documents says the famous letter that proves it is very likely a forgery. So who actually invented pizza? Where did it come from? And how did a flatbread cooked on Persian war shields in 500 BC become the most eaten food on the planet? Stick around. This is the real story, and I promise it is way more interesting than anything they taught you in school. All right, let's go back, way back. We're talking roughly 10,000 years ago, 10,000 BCE. No Italy, no pasta, no pizza. Just early humans grinding wild grains into a rough paste, slapping it on hot stones, and eating the world's saddest pancake. But hey, it was bread, it worked. Fast forward a couple thousand years, and things get interesting. The Sumerians in Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, were baking barley-based flatbreads in clay ovens and topping them with whatever they had: oils, seeds, dried herbs. The Egyptians figured out fermentation. They discovered yeast, let the dough rise, and produced proper bread. And yeah, they were absolutely putting toppings on it. But here's where it gets really interesting. In the 6th century BCE, about 500 years before the birth of Christ, Persian soldiers serving under Darius the Great did something wild. They were on long military campaigns, far from home, and they needed to cook fast. So they baked flatbreads directly on their battle shields over open fires, and then topped them with cheese and dates for sustenance. That, my friends, is the earliest documented ancestor of pizza, cooked on a weapon of war. Not exactly what they show you in the Domino's commercials. The Persian soldiers topped these shield-cooked flatbreads with cheese and dates, filling, portable, efficient, the world's first field ration pizza. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Mediterranean, the ancient Greeks had their own version. They called it Plakous, a round flatbread topped with olive oil, herbs, onion, garlic, and cheese, baked on hot stones, sold by street vendors at the Agora, the public marketplace. It was cheap, portable, customizable. It basically was street pizza, 2,000 years before Domino's. Then the Romans arrived, and the Romans, as they typically did, took the Greek idea, absorbed it into their culture, and made it their own. They developed a flatbread called panis focaccias, baked directly in the hearth, which you might recognize as the origin of what we now call focaccia. The Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century AD, described flatbreads served with olive oil, cheese, honey, and sometimes anchovies. And the Roman poet Virgil, in his epic The Aeneid, describes a scene where the hero Aeneas and his crew eat their meal, and when the food is gone and they're still hungry, they realize they haven't eaten the flatbread they've been using as a plate. So they eat that too. Ancient edible plates. The Romans were accidentally inventing the pizza crust. So by the height of the Roman Empire, the basic blueprint of pizza, a flat baked dough base with toppings, had already existed across Persia, Greece, and Rome for centuries. Italy didn't invent it, Italy inherited it. Okay, real quick, because I genuinely want to know. Drop a comment right now and tell me your absolute go-to pizza order. What toppings? What style? What's your move? I'm seriously curious. And look, I'm not here to judge. If you write pineapple, we're gonna need to have a longer conversation. Alright, keep watching, because what comes next is where the story gets genuinely insane. Okay, here's the thing about pizza as we know it today. That red sauce, the whole tomato-forward thing. It shouldn't exist. And for most of human history, it didn't. Because the tomato is not European, not even close. The tomato originated in the Andes Mountains of South America, in what is now Peru. It spread through Central America into Mexico, where it was cultivated by the Aztecs long before Europeans even knew the Americas existed. When the Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés conquered the Aztec capital Tenochtitlan in 1521, they encountered the tomato and brought it back to Spain. And that's how a South American mountain fruit started its very long, very dramatic journey toward becoming pizza sauce. The tomato reached Italy by the 1540s. A botanist named Pietro Andrea Mattioli first documented it in his 1544 herbal guide, describing this strange new golden apple that had arrived from a distant land. He wasn't even sure what it was. He thought it might be a type of eggplant. And then, in 1548, the house steward of Cosimo de' Medici, the Grand Duke of Tuscany, one of the most powerful men in Italy, wrote a letter to the Medici's private secretary confirming that a basket of tomatoes had arrived safely from the Duke's estate in Tuscany. The Italians had tomatoes. They had the ingredient. Do you know what they did with them? They put them on a windowsill and stared at them. Seriously. For most of the 1500s and 1600s, Europeans grew tomatoes as ornamental plants, decorations. They thought they were pretty, but they did not trust them as food. Tomatoes belong to the nightshade family, the same family as deadly nightshade and belladonna, plants that can actually kill you. It took roughly 200 years for the tomato to go from decorative garden plant to actual cooking ingredient in Italy. And when it finally made it into Italian recipes, early Italian dishes using tomatoes were called alla spagnola, the Spanish way, because Spain had been cooking with tomatoes long before Italy ever did. The Spanish had access through their American colonies. And there's one more ingredient we should talk about: mozzarella cheese. The real stuff, mozzarella di bufala, comes from the milk of water buffalo, an animal that is not native to Italy at all. Historians believe Arab traders introduced water buffalo to Sicily during the Arab conquest of Sicily beginning in 827 AD, and they later spread to Campania in southern Italy. The point is this: pizza is not one culture's invention. The most Italian food in the world is a collaboration between 5 different civilizations across 3 continents, and Italy was the place where all those threads finally came together. That's actually remarkable, but it's not the simple story that gets told. Now, with all of that said, we need to talk about Naples, because Naples absolutely 100% genuinely deserves enormous credit in this story. By the 18th century, Naples had become one of the largest and most chaotic cities in all of Europe. Packed streets, massive working-class culture, and a relentless problem. People needed cheap food, fast, that they could eat while walking to work. Street vendors throughout Naples would sell flatbreads topped with tomatoes, garlic, oil, anchovies, and sometimes cheese, carried through the streets on trays or from open-air stalls. It was the food of the Lazzaroni, the poor working class of the city. Fast, filling, and cost almost nothing. The upper classes absolutely looked down on it. Foreign tourists described it as looking repulsive. And here's an interesting linguistic wrinkle in this story. The word pizza is documented much earlier than most people think. The earliest known written record of the word pizza dates all the way back to 997 AD in a Latin document from the town of Gaeta in central Italy. A tenant farmer apparently owed a local bishop 12 pizzas every Christmas and every Easter as a form of rent. A pizza tithe, paid twice a year to a bishop. That is the greatest tax system in the history of human civilization. The etymology of the word is genuinely disputed. Some linguists trace it to the Latin pincere, meaning to pound or stamp. Others suggest Lombard or even Greek roots. Nobody has definitively settled it. But by the early 1800s, Naples had pizza very close to what we eat today. The year is 1889. King Umberto I and Queen Margherita of Savoy are visiting Naples on a royal tour. The story goes that after days of rich French cuisine, the royal couple wanted to try something local. A celebrated pizza maker named Raffaele Esposito, who ran a restaurant called Pizzeria di Pietro, was reportedly summoned to cook for the queen. He prepared 3 different pizzas. The one Queen Margherita loved most was simple: tomato sauce, fresh mozzarella, and basil leaves. Red, white, green, the colors of the Italian flag. He named it Pizza Margherita in her honor. It is a beautiful story. It is patriotic, romantic, and perfectly constructed. It's the kind of origin story you want to be true. There's just one problem. Food historian Zachary Nowak spent years investigating the famous document that supposedly proves this whole thing, a letter that has been displayed on the wall of Pizzeria Brandi for over a century. After comparing the handwriting on the displayed letter to authenticated documents in the Italian state archives, Nowak concluded the handwriting doesn't match. The seal doesn't match the official royal seals from that period. The letter is very likely a forgery. But here's the part that gets really suspicious. 6 years before this supposed 1889 royal pizza moment, Esposito was already petitioning the local police for permission to rename his restaurant Pizzeria della Regina d'Italia, Pizzeria of the Queen of Italy. The guy was actively trying to associate himself with royalty years before the queen ever supposedly showed up. Was it a long con? A legendary hustle? We may never know for certain. What we do know is this: the combination of tomato, mozzarella, and basil already existed on Neapolitan pizzas before 1889. Esposito didn't invent it. He may have just been the world's first viral food marketer, a man who understood the power of a celebrity endorsement so deeply that he may have invented one from scratch. Honestly, questionable ethics, but respect. And then, in the late 1800s, everything changed again. Waves of Italian immigrants, primarily from southern Italy and the Naples region, arrived in the United States. They settled in New York, Chicago, Philadelphia. They brought their culture, their language, and in 1905, a bread baker from Naples named Gennaro Lombardi opened a small shop in the Little Italy neighborhood of Manhattan. He received a license to operate what became the first documented pizzeria in the United States, Lombardi's, at 32 Spring Street in Manhattan. It's still there today. And what Americans did with pizza changed it forever. The crisp was crispier thanks to coal-fired ovens, and critically, it was sold by the slice. Walk up, pay a few cents, eat in 90 seconds. Genius! Then came World War II. American soldiers stationed in Italy discovered pizza and came home wanting it. And the American food industry answered that demand spectacularly. Pizza exploded, first in Italian-American neighborhoods, then in mainstream America, then across the globe. Delivery, chains, frozen pizza, stuffed crust, deep dish, Detroit Square, New Haven white clam. The world said yes to all of it. Today, the global pizza market is valued at approximately $280 billion. Over 17 billion servings are eaten every year across more than 85 countries. It has been eaten in space. It has a museum in Philadelphia. It is sold on 6 continents. The world's most Italian food became the world's most American food and then became everybody's food. So here's where we land. Pizza is not Italian, not in the simple, clean way the story gets told. It is an ancient idea as old as organized human civilization that traveled through Persian military camps, Greek marketplaces, Roman hearths, and Neapolitan street stalls. Built on a tomato that South American farmers cultivated in the Andes thousands of years before Europe knew it existed. It was topped with cheese made from a water buffalo introduced by Arab traders in the 9th century. It was carried across an ocean by immigrants, reinvented in a New York neighborhood, and eventually scaled into a global industry worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Pizza is not Italian. Pizza is human. It's a story about how civilizations borrow from each other, build on each other, and occasionally steal from each other. The next time someone hands you a slice and says, "Pizza is Italian," you can smile, take a bite, and say, "Sort of." The concept is Persian. The tomato is Peruvian via Spain. The cheese comes from a water buffalo introduced by Arab settlers. The dough tradition is Roman, and the version you're eating right now was probably perfected in Brooklyn. That story, the real story, is so much better than the myth. If this kind of thing is your deal, digging into the hidden, complicated, fascinating real history behind the foods and ideas we think we completely understand, then you are going to love what's coming next on this channel. The real origin of chocolate, the surprisingly dark history of the hamburger, the food that accidentally built the British Empire. None of them are what you'd expect. Until then, stay curious and seriously, go eat some pizza.